This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
Welcome back to the Center in the City podcast. I'm your host, Wade Brill, and I am so glad you are here. Today in the pod, we are talking to Jessica Grossmeier, who is an award-winning researcher, speaker, and author of two books. One, Reimagining Workplace Wellbeing, and the second that we're going to dive deeper into today called Well at Work. Jessica is a leading authority in workforce well-being, and she collaborates with employers and well-being service providers to create evidence-based strategies to support individuals and organizations thriving. Jessica is recognized as one of the most influential women leaders in health promotion by the American Journal of Health Promotion. It's connected with Jessica through a mutual contact who just raved about how amazing of a mentor Jessica is and was, and how she was somebody I needed to meet. I love Jessica's work and her approach to well-being because it's straightforward, it's to the point, it's evidence-based. Jessica is somebody that is deeply rooted in her values and her way of leading and living life. You can learn more about Jessica, and all the links to her books and the ways that you can connect with her will be in the show notes. I'm so excited for you to hear this interview with Jessica because this book is deeply comprehensive and holistic, and you know I love holistic care. And so Jessica really walks us through this process, these three pillars of how we can connect to our purpose in life, how we can connect to others, and how we can also find this spiritual connection to something bigger than ourselves that is also essential for our well-being. So wherever you are listening to this podcast, while you're on a walk, chopping vegetables, commuting, I welcome you to settle in and let's get centered. Jessica, welcome to the Center in the City podcast.
Hi, it's so good to be here. Thanks for inviting me. This is my first official podcast for Well at Work, so thank you.
Yeah, I'm so excited. I know we've been talking about this podcast for a while, so I'm so excited to have you here and to offer listeners all the juiciness that I know is about to come. And I'd love to kick us off by having you share, what does being centered mean to you?
Oh, what does centered mean? To me, I think of that word as a groundedness. I think of it as a stabilizing factor. You know how my sister has introduced me to boating terms with this book. And there's sort of a keel that enters into the water, and it's sort of the thing that keeps the boat stable when it's being buffeted around by wind or waves. I think of centeredness as being that for our lives.
I love that visual. And also going the depth below the water. And we talk a lot about in mindfulness how the top of the water can be so rough and full of so many choppiness and wind and waves and white caps. However, if we go below the water, how the water gets more still and there's a calmer sense. And so I love that visual of the keel anchoring us deeper into the depths of the water. Will you share with us your reason, your wake up call? And I love that you call it a wake up call in this book.
Mm-hmm.
But your wake up call and your reason for creating Well at Work, because I think so many people wait for their wake up call to wake them up. And I know I've had my own wake up calls in my life as a cancer survivor. And I always look back and I'm like, I want to help people before they have these wake up calls. But it's like how, so I think hearing from more and more people about their wake up calls is like, how can that inspire us to even take charge before we have these moments? Because you talk about it in such beautiful depth in the introduction of this book.
Yeah, so the wake up call that I reference at the start of the book was 15 years ago for me. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I was struggling with burnout. I was struggling with cynicism in my work, which is one of the core measurable aspects of burnout. Um, and I knew I was exhausted, but all of the emotional and mental things that go with that I was unaware of that. And so I kept just thinking it was my own issue that I needed to deal with, not realizing that there are systemic factors at play. And because I was putting the whole burden on myself, I didn't know how to engage with my organization effectively. And so I wrote my first book that came out in 2022 and I include that story to address the systemic and workplace factors that organizations need to be mindful of to help prevent burnout so that people don't have to get to the point of physical collapse like I did, or they get to the point where they just need to go on leave because they just can't figure out how to manage it anymore. There are upstream strategies that we can be using for organizations and for individuals. The reason I wrote Well at Work was because I started to notice, one, increasing invitations to address the individual aspects. What can individuals do? And for a while, I was very reluctant to engage in conversations about what individuals could do because I thought, well, this is organizations wanting to get off the hook, and not wanting to address the systems issues. And so I leaned hard into that for a few years. And it looked like we were, as an industry, starting to make a difference. Organizations said, this is now top of the strategy. We are interested in investing in the mental and emotional well-being of our employees. They seem to be getting the message until they didn't. Now I'm seeing some retraction, and particularly last fall, I started to notice that workplace well-being programs were being defunded, deprioritized, the defunding of DEI initiatives, which, I mean, if you can't feel like you're valued for who you are as a person at work with neurodiverse issues or coming from different backgrounds or perspectives, that's well-being, folks. And so, that really hit me hard. I'm like, wow, where is this industry going? And then I started to see the professional peers, some of them were people I looked up to who were older than me, some were younger than me, deciding to leave jobs or the field altogether due to burnout, feeling lack of engagement and fulfillment at work, feeling like the organizations weren't aligned with what they wanted to do with well-being. And so to me, that was my impetus for, you know what? I still believe strongly that organizations have a role to play. And there are things individuals can also do to protect their well-being, because we can be our own worst enemies when it comes to setting boundary, consistently prioritizing our own well-being. And those are the upstream things, the skills and the behaviors that we can do as individuals that can keep us from the wake-up call where, okay, I collapsed, I'm in the ER. Now the organization needs to provide me with the space I need. How do we as individuals help ourselves and our organizations to understand how to prevent that kind of wake-up call?
Oh, you just shared so many great insights. And I appreciate you highlighting that it can be both and gets to be both, of not only just what's happening within cultural workplace engagement and what they're funding, what they're saying matters, and what talk they're walking, but also what's even happening in our greater systems in life. And then also down to the individual, like, what are we doing? What actions and behaviors are we prioritizing? And I want to read a snippet from, this is chapter 2, page 19, where you say, I began to realize that the reason I was pushing myself so hard at work, even to the point of physical collapse, was due to feelings of emptiness deep within me. Beneath the veneer of busyness, there was a growing sense of disengagement and a lack of fulfillment. When I read those words, I was like, oh, they hit so deeply for me, because I see that in so many of my clients, that pushing yourself so hard at work and then feeling that emptiness and coming from a place of empty, like once I keep pushing and I get the thing, or I get the promotion, or I make more money, or thinking that something outside of us is going to create some sort of fulfillment, I think is really the key to where that burnout happens, and where the individual can take their own awareness of where they acting from. Are they acting from a place of striving, from a place of emptiness, from a place of people pleasing, a place of needing to look good? Or are they coming from this deeper place of connection and purpose that you talk about so beautifully in the rest of the book? I'm curious, first of all, when I just read that snippet, like what comes alive for you?
You know, I love that you read that, so thank you. I am not alone in having felt that. I mean, you said you're seeing it. I was just watching a TED Talk from somebody last week, and it's years old, the TED Talk. And it was, I believe it was a business leader from India, mid-career to late career. And he was saying the very same things. Feeling this way is one, common, it's two, global. And I think it's a part of that innate human need that is within all of us to want to spend our hours and our days and our energy contributing to something bigger and greater than ourselves. It comes out of that. And sometimes our work, it's easy to lose sight of what's meaningful. Even for me, I still struggle with this, because it's so easy. And we're going to get into this later. It's easy to get into the task list and the busyness and the, what do I need to be doing to meet my, key performance indicators or my goals? Even a job like what we do, where we're trying to minister to the human spirit, it can feel like a grind a lot of the time. And so what you're doing, Wade, is so important because you're giving people the skill set to connect to that part of themselves that needs to be turned to, so that we can find that alignment between what matters most to us and our values and what we're doing with our energy all day long. And that's what I hope to do in this book. So
yeah, I mean, I think you beautifully highlight the connection to self, connection to others, and then this transcendence quality of connection to something bigger than ourselves. And so in the world that I've grown up in my training, we talk about it from the I, the we, the all, and how it all connects to our sense of self, our sense of being here in this world, and our sense of contribution. I'm curious, how would you suggest that people find their sense of purpose, find that sense of connection to themselves in a world that is so loud? And maybe when people are even just so bogged down by the to-do lists, right? And by the metrics, that they feel so lost, like even having a sense of purpose while they're looking at an Excel sheet can feel so far away. So what are some of the ways that you suggest people can really connect to the sense of purpose?
Well, I do have purposeful practices that I think part of it, there's really two parts of it though, is one, you've got to spend some time first identifying what matters to you. And one of the things that I learned on my journey was that changes over time. Now, this doesn't seem like such an amazing realization to make, but I had been, I'd gone through leadership and professional development training that had me identifying my purpose in my 20s, right? And so I was fortunate to have access to tools that helped me to think about my values and what mattered to me and my priorities. And I came up with like a purpose statement for my work. The challenge is our purposes can change, and our work is not our only source of purpose. And if we focus on just one sense of purpose, we can miss the other things in our lives that matter to us. And I think that's part of what I discovered when I was going through this burnout and disengagement and lack of fulfillment in my work. I actually had a crisis of purpose because there were certain aspects of the work environment, and it wasn't necessarily the workplace culture. It was actually what was going on within the broader industry that was feeling unsatisfying to me. it was part of this big system. I was so overwhelmed because I'm like, well, I'm not going to change the world. This issue is bigger than me. And I began to feel like, well, gosh, if I step away from this work that I felt so passionate about, what's my purpose then? I didn't even know what else I could be doing. And I think a lot of people feel that way. And so when we start to feel these inner senses of something's not quite aligned, something doesn't feel like it's giving me the energy it used to, we can choose to pay attention to that, or we can choose to distract ourselves. And society is extremely good, and it's culturally normative to distract ourselves away from those issues, right? And so creating the space and the time to begin to think about what's floating my boat these days, what's energizing me, what's not energizing me. And I believe you know, Wade, because you're part of my launch team. I created a Well at Work journal as part of a gift for my launch members. I have a copy for myself. It was sort of one of the author's initial copies of it that we decided not to give away. And I'm like, I'm going to create one for myself. And anytime I feel excited about a conversation at work, when I feel like something I'm doing is leaving me jazzed and energized, I'm going to write down what that is, because it can be really easy to focus on the things that diminish and confuse and disrupt our energy. And we forget all the wonderful things that happened that day that did energize us and did feel aligned. And so I'm just creating a journal page at the end of the day with the pluses and minuses. What added to my energy? What excited me today? And what were the things that left me feeling a little like unsatisfied or unhappy with the way things happen? I can then use that as a tool to go back and look and say, hey, what am I learning? What am I understanding about what's energizing me now in my work? So we create that awareness. And then we actually have to say, okay, how do we keep in touch with that through regular practices?
I love that suggestion. And that's something I do with my clients. I recommend them to start to pay attention, because I think we live so much of our lives in our heads, and that learning how to tune in to like, what does the body actually feel is enjoyable? What's giving me energy? What's lighting me up? And what's like, what feels heavy? What feels like I have just more tension in my shoulders and jaw. And just us starting to discern that becomes so much information that we can bring into the choices that we make. But when people like need to turn that knob on, turning on these senses that maybe are shut off most of their day. And so I love that invitation for people to kind of wake up, start to connect to their purpose by just paying attention to what's lighting them up. Where are they feeling more energy? Where are they feeling more drain? For those that love what they do, they feel really purposeful and connected. Sometimes what I've seen is that they can become workaholics because they're getting so much dopamine from their work. They might feel in the flow, they might feel that success, they're getting that reward system, they're doing well. How do we even help people in those moments widen their sense of purpose to even just feel it elsewhere in their life, so there's maybe some more balance? Because I think when we can get so attached to our sense of self wrapped up in work, it can be really easy to lose ourselves then. So even if it's a place of a lot of enjoyment and purpose, it's like, how do we also hold that lightly? And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
I'm going to speak a little bit from the research for a moment, and then maybe we can turn it back to more specifics. I think, like all good things, too much of a good thing can become a bad thing. And we know from research that identifying your purpose in your work and aligning your values and what matters to you and your skills and your beliefs to your work is actually a really good thing. And sometimes when people have that strong alignment with their work, and it takes the place of all the other ways in their lives where they might find purpose. And so psychologists talk about two kinds of passion that we might have: harmonious passion and obsessive passion. Obsessive passion entails what we become obsessed with, or we are relentlessly pursuing, that overactivates us. It overpowers us. Our own sense of self-control can be lost as we begin to let go of the other things that matter to us in life. We can actually begin to feel guilty ashamed or burnt out when we're not paying attention to those other things that matter. But we can't turn off the focus on work because it's that dopamine hit, right? And we've been told that this is a good thing, right? And all of the managers and supervisors and the people in the workplace are going to encourage us to give as much as we can to our jobs. And so there's a bit of a counter-cultural shift to this. When we're talking about harmonious passion, it's about being mindful of the multiple areas of interest that can function together harmoniously for our own flourishing. And so for me, translating that into practice is identifying what matters to you, not just in your work, but in your life as a whole. And there are multiple purposes for our life. Work is just one area, one way that we find purpose. Vic Strecker talks about this in his book, Life on Purpose, which is one of the first books I turned to when I started to dig into purpose a little bit more. And he suggests identify these multiple purposes and then realize that those things might be in tension with each other. And so when we create harmonious passion or harmonious purpose, we attempt to say, well, how can we align those multiple purposes? And so, for example, my health and my marriage are two of my highest priorities in life. My work is also a really high priority, but those other things often take a backseat to my work. So we've established a daily ritual where we end our workday with a walk together. It's outside, we're getting access to nature, and it's a conversation that we have for about 45 minutes to an hour where we're just talking about, how did your day go? What were the ups? What were the downs? How are you feeling right now? Or we might talk about something that has nothing to do with what consumed our attention all day. We might talk about upcoming vacation, or did you talk to your mom recently? But what it allows us to do is we're getting some movement, we're getting outside, which is an automatic perspective shift. And it allows us to connect and have conversation with one another. Oftentimes on the way, we're running into neighbors who are walking their dogs, and we're having conversations with them on the sidewalk for 5 or 10 minutes. And so it's enriching in a lot of different levels. So it's contributing to our health, to our happiness, to our social network, to our marriage. And it allows us to sometimes process some work junk at the same time. So that has felt like a very aligned way for us to feed a lot of different aspects of what matters to us in life, and to feel like it's an important part of our well-being.
I love that invitation to really look at our purposes and passions from this harmonious versus obsessive lens, because I think it also demonstrates how we're holistic beings, that we can have purposes in many different areas, but how are they also contributing and connecting to one another? And so even just hearing your beautiful ritual at the end of the day with you and your husband, how that also probably affects both of you at work, or both of you in feeling more filled up to then engage in your social relationships, right? It's not only just supporting your health and your marriage, which I'm hearing are your top priorities right now in life, but it also probably ripples into other areas. And so I love that invitation for listeners, if they're feeling more zoomed in to that obsessive place, like how they can widen the lens and know that by kind of releasing their grip a little bit and finding more alignment, that they can also be bringing this sense of passion into other areas of their life. I'm curious because you talk a lot about the importance of spirituality in the workplace. And I love how you differentiate the difference between spirituality and religion. So I'm curious if you could just even highlight that for listeners here before we dive a little deeper into the spiritual topic.
Yeah, would love to. There's a whole chapter on this. And, the way I've started to think about spirituality is I think of it as 3 dimensions or 3 levels. And you spoke to it already with the I, we, all. At the individual level, as connecting more deeply with ourselves. So that's where purpose comes in. It's about, what do I believe to be true? What are the things I value? What are the things that I want most in life? And what do I care about? Right? What are my strengths? What are my gifts? What are my interests? When we connect to what those things are for us, that's connecting more deeply with our inner selves. The next level is social connection with others. And that's how do we interact and connect with those around us. And so we can bring that understanding of who we are and what we care about, and understanding that we are whole beings when we are able to have healthy relationships with other people around us that can appreciate and nurture those things that we value in ourselves. When we can come alongside other people who share our values, share our priorities, share our interests in life. And that's where transcendence comes in, which is that connection to something bigger than ourselves, that all piece of it, that third dimension. When we are identifying what matters to us, finding other people that share those things, and we're able to move forward together in alignment, whether that's at work or outside of work, that really to me is meeting spiritual needs of people. And so when a lot of people think about religion, they're thinking about specific faith or wisdom traditions. And for many people, the things that matter most to them, their values, where they find community and alignment around those things, might be part of a faith tradition. But you can be spiritual without being religious. For some people, they are both spiritual and religious. So we have to acknowledge that when we talk about spirituality, religion can be a piece of it for some people. It is not a requirement, though. And I believe it is possible for us to talk about spirituality and make space for a diverse understanding of where people might find those sources of meaning and purpose in their lives.
Thank you for breaking it down and sharing the difference. And I think that's really important because you talk about this in your book of how companies have kind of strayed away from spirituality because it's been so linked to religion. And obviously in America, North America, there's a lot of rules and regulations about and protections around religious freedom and how that's been brought and created space in the workplace. How can companies be creating more environments? How can leadership, culture, managers creating more space for spirituality in their teams, in the individual, in the culture? I know this is a big question. So curious to see, like, even what you're noticing is possible with where companies are right now in this day and age as they've been pulling back on investing in well-being.
Yeah, I love that question. And that was the question I was pondering in 2022 when I wrote my first book, Reimagining Workplace Wellbeing. That focuses specifically on a call to companies, anybody who's interested in or responsible for the well-being of their employees or one another, that they would consider a more holistic approach. When I first started writing that book, I thought, well, maybe in 5 years, there might be some openness to this message. I was delighted and surprised to find that there was actually quite a bit of openness and receptivity when that book came out in 2022. We are now seeing organizations like McKinsey and Gallup in their models endorsing a whole person approach. And when they talk about a whole person approach, they're talking about things like purpose, social connection and community, and helping people to connect to something bigger than themselves through volunteerism, for example, or through awe walks, or through mindfulness meditation. So organizations, when they start to think about spirituality from those science-backed practices that, by the way, have been around for a really long time, thousands of years in some wisdom traditions. When companies start to think about, well, how are we incorporating some of these things into our workplaces already? We're seeing reflection rooms and quiet spaces. We've for a long time seen organizations incorporating aspects of nature into the workplace or giving people access to it outside of the workplace. Mindfulness, we've seen chief mindfulness officers and whole systems in organizations to be being created around how do we help people to be more mindful and present and focused in their work? How do we actually create the conditions that help people to engage in flow, which is, by the way, a self-transcendent mental state, which is measurable. And there's a lot of research that shows you can create the conditions for flow at work. And when you do that, you are supporting spiritual needs. So that's what I focus on in my first book. And I do get into it quite a bit in this book as well, because we as individuals also need to identify for ourselves, regardless of what the organization's doing or what's available in our community, what makes sense for me. what meets my spiritual needs, because not everyone's into seated meditation. I know I'm not, but awe walks, moving meditations like yoga, those kinds of things I have found are important ingredients to build into the fabric of my regular day, when I can just take a pause, take a moment, and consider, wait, what's going on here? How do I feel right now about what's going on here? What am I doing? What's my mindset? And it gives me a chance to recalibrate and use other practices like breath work or journaling or a conversation with somebody, to shift that, to get my energy back and my focus back to where I want it to be.
I love that invitation from the workplace systems perspective of how they can be cultivating more spirituality, and also the empowerment of the individual, how people can be bringing these practices into their life. And that's very much what I help a lot of clients practice. And I love that you mentioned awe walks, because I have a whole private podcast feed called Centered Walks, and awe walks is one of them. And that ability to get outside, to find those glimmers in what I call also like daily delights that are there, that remind us of our humanness and remind us of our sense of connection to others and to trees and to the birds. And that helps kind of get us out of our own way, right? And helps us get more perspective on life. And it also taps us into our hearts. Like, it allows us to be kinder, kinder to the human experience, kinder to the strangers walking down the street, because we're more connected to like, oh, yeah, what's happening in one is also happening in the all. For you, when you see the state of the current world that we're in, and there's so much happening, it's like, how can people really be inspired to prioritize their well-being?
It's interesting that you use the word inspired. How can people be inspired to prioritize their well-being? Well, I think some of it comes down to identifying other people who are doing that. We need good role models and good examples. There might not be any in your current workplace. And so that's where it helps for us. That's where the social connection part of us, the peer support, is so important. Can we find other people who share these priorities? Now, everybody's well-being priorities are different, right? For some people, for them, that might be certain kinds of movement. For other people, it might be certain patterns of eating. For others, it might be spending more time in nature, camping. For some, it might be a creative pursuit like art, line dancing. I mean, you name it, right? It can be anything. And so I think anytime we can come alongside other people who are making paths in their lives to actually touch base with those things often, that can help support us in our well-being journey. So I talked with a friend recently, and I was asked, we were just doing a regular catch up, and one of the new things in her life was she'd signed up for some art classes. She's like, I don't consider myself to be a particularly good artist, but this is something that I identified was an interest of mine. And I knew the only way I was going to protect it in my life was if I actually paid money and signed up for class. And so for her, she understood that that was the way she was going to create the priority in her life, is to actually invest some money in a class and let her family know, this is what I'm doing on Tuesdays at X o'clock. Right? For other people, it might be, for my sister, for example, she connects with friends for a walk at 5 a.m. In the middle of winter, if you know somebody's standing outside your door waiting for you or down the block, you're going to get out of bed, right? And go meet up with that friend. So I think this is where social support can be really, really helpful. And in the workplace, if you are in a formal or informal leadership role, there's an opportunity for you to say, you know what, maybe I'm not engaging in this for my well-being, but maybe I can do it to be a role model for others. I remember back when I was first experiencing all of these issues for myself with my well-being wake-up call, and I was doing all of my workouts in the morning. I would do yoga in the morning. I would go for a run in the morning. I was training for a half marathon at the time. And I thought, check the box, I'm taking care of my well-being. And so when my colleague across the hall from me would invite me for a walk at 3 o'clock every day with the rest of the team, I would say, no, I've already done my workout for the day. what I really need to do is get through my email so I can actually get out of here at a reasonable time. What I now know is that in a vice president role in that organization, I had an opportunity to send a message that it is okay for you to prioritize this 10-minute walk by joining them for the walk. And, I wish I had done things differently. I now know that, sitting is really bad for you at the level I was doing it. And so now I actually look for opportunities to put walks into my life. But as leaders, it's really important for us to role model that, because even if we're not doing it for ourselves, we might be sending a signal to other people. Hey, it is okay for you to prioritize your well-being in this way, whether that's movement or if it's leaving in time to catch your kid's soccer game and prioritizing that might be your priority. We can help each other with that. And I think it's really important.
I love what you said earlier, and you also highlight this in the book of like what makes sense for me, and that empowering the individual to really think about, like, tune in, right? We talked about that in the beginning of this interview, of like tuning to our senses of like what's lighting me up, what are my needs. So tuning in of like what makes sense for me. And then you even also in the book share ways that can empower the individual to set better boundaries at work, to interview their hiring managers, to like really check if that team culture is in alignment with the individual. So I really love how you're empowering the individual and then empowering also the leader and individual to think about how can I model behavior? Because sometimes that's more motivating for people, is to think about how can I inspire others versus what do I need? As a mother or parent, you might be more motivated to say, hey, I want to instill healthy habits in my family and my children. So I'm more motivated to demonstrate going for a walk than just for myself. So with a leader, same thing of, I want to instill this kind of culture. So let me embody these values and for the greater team. Is there anything else, Jessica, that you would love to share?
Yeah, I think we've talked quite a bit in this conversation about aspects of, purpose and connecting within ourselves. Talked a little bit about sort of how do we connect with all. When it comes to interpersonal relationships at work, I think one thing that I'd love for people to think about is, as they approach their conversations with the people that they see every day as part of their work, do they feel like they can bring themselves into that conversation? So there's been a lot of attention paid to authenticity, to transparency, to vulnerability. I love Brene Brown's work in this area. And for some people, that's asking a lot, because they have come into the workplace with this opinion that all your personal stuff stays outside of your work. When we allow ourselves to reveal what's important to us, what matters to us, what we're interested in to other people, it gives us an opportunity to connect in ways we would not otherwise. If our conversations are 100% around the tasks at work, the priorities, what's on the agenda, and we never make time or space to talk about what we're binge watching on TV, the protein bar we just discovered, we just love and used on our last road trip. The things, the funny little thing that happened to you on the way to somewhere. Those tiny little sparks are the things that have the ability to connect us in ways that you can't really put a price on. Because, we talk a lot about mental health, and Mental Health Month is coming up next month as we record this. There's a lot of emphasis on, well, we need to let people know when we need help, when we're not doing okay. And we need to create environments that allow people to feel that way. If I have no idea who you are on the other side of the screen, or the other side of this phone call, or the other side of this desk as a person first, we can't ever have that conversation about what's really going on. And so these somewhat insignificant conversations about what we're doing, what interests us, these personal parts of our lives, I think are foundational to us being able to come to work in more authentic ways, in more transparent ways. And as leaders, we have to set the tone for that.
I love that invitation. And there's research around that. I know Gallup has research, right? When you have a best friend at work, you have higher levels of satisfaction and engagement. And so that invitation to connect with one another, to have those little interactions, whether you're a virtual company, hybrid, or fully back in person, how important just sharing our humanness again is, asking questions, being curious, knowing what's happening outside of the meetings, outside of the emails, outside of the to-do list. And you also share some really great tips in the book of how to practice mindful communication, how to be curious, how to stay present with others, how to not necessarily give advice, but just to hold that space and acknowledge one another. So I'm so excited for this book to be out in the world and for people to get their hands on it. And it's just a really beautiful reflection. I was telling Jessica this before hitting record. It's an invitation to really just go inwards and sit with yourself. And you model the vulnerability and the research so beautifully. So thank you for sharing this. Where can people learn more about you and stay connected to your work?
I'm going to make this really easy. I do not use all the platforms. My platform is LinkedIn. That's where I'm posting about what I'm reading, what I'm thinking about, how I'm incorporating these things. I have a LinkedIn newsletter where I continue to share my stories and the things I'm learning along the way. I also have a website, which I know you'll put in the show notes. There are free resources. If people are looking for what can I do, especially as an organization, to support spiritual needs, how can I be designing my workplace well-being efforts in a way that are aligned with science and with research that shows what's effective, go to my website and get some free resources, sign up for my newsletter, and we can stay connected that way.
Amazing. Thanks for being here, Jessica.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening to this episode of the Center in the City podcast. I highly, highly, highly recommend ordering Well at Work right now because this is such a helpful book. It takes the woo-woo and the fluff out of well-being and supports you really connecting to the science, the research behind why well-being is essential for your life, for your impact at work, for the impact it has on your relationships, and all the ways that our well-being ripples into all areas of our life. Join Jessica and I on LinkedIn to continue the conversation. Share with us your takeaways, what you're most excited to practice or integrate into your own life. For instance, maybe you want to slow down, grab your journal, and reflect on, have you had your own wake-up call at work? And what is that wake-up call, or what was that wake-up call? And what did that teach you about what's important to you? What's valuable and meaningful in your life? You a leader at work, and maybe you're feeling inspired to bring some more spiritual essence into the workplace, into your Monday morning team meetings, into your weekly wins. Or maybe being a leader, you recognize, hey, the team hasn't really gotten more vulnerable with each other, or hasn't really shared or built that strong sense of psychological safety with one another. It might be time for some deeper team engagement. Maybe as an individual, you recognize, you know what, I'm feeling kind of lonely on my team or disconnected, and let me make a personal effort to engage just one member of my team this week for a cup of coffee. Share with us your insights and what you're most excited and inspired to practice on LinkedIn. Also in the show notes, you can find all the links to Jessica's work and to order her books. You can also check out the Centered Walks if you're looking for some daily micro moments that offer you these opportunities to get out of your head, stop scrolling, and get more connected into your body and into the present moment. Until next time, stay centered.